Hi everyone, this is Sarah O'Keefe. I will be the presenter for today's webcast, which is called Attractive DITA, It Is Possible. Thank you for joining us today. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. You are all on mute, and I am the only one that has audio going. You do have a questions tab or a questions area in the GoToWebinar interface, and we would ask you to ask your questions there. I will maybe address some of them as I'm going along, and I'm also going to have some time at the end for a Q&A session. We do have quite a few people on this call, so we do need everybody to submit their questions in that way. We can't open up the audio. There are too many people on the call. We are recording the presentation, and there are a couple of things you need to know about that. First of all, as an attendee, your information does not appear in the webcast, or sorry, in the recording. And secondly, we will cut off the recording before we get to the official Q&A session at the end. So if you are on this webcast and there's a question that you want to ask, when we get to the Q&A session, that section of it will not be recorded and will not be available in the recorded version that we post on the internet. So with that, we can go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah. I am the founder and president here at Scriptorium Publishing. We're based in North Carolina. And what we do for our customers sort of worldwide is content strategy or information architecture, or pick a buzzword of the week, for technical communication. I'm particularly interested in the collision between or among content publishing and technology. How do you apply technology to your content and publish it as efficiently as possible? I wanted to kick this thing off with a poll. So I wanted to ask you where you are with this. How are you producing DITA, or perhaps how are you planning to produce DITA? I have made this such that you can actually check more than one option, so feel free to go ahead and check off all the things that you are using or considering using or thinking about. If there is something that I missed here in terms of what you might be using, you can go ahead and click Other. And if you wouldn't mind specifying in the Q&A tab what those other things might be, then I can also highlight those when we go over the responses and the answers that people have come up with here. So what we're looking for here is, are you planning to use the DITA Open Toolkit, or some customization of it? Are you looking at help authoring tools such as Flare and RoboHelp? I've put Author It in there. I know that's a little bit questionable, but I didn't have enough room to do more options. Page layout tools like FrameMaker or maybe InDesign. There are some things I put under Other, like DITA to Go and ePublisher Pro, and some other things along those lines might go under Other. Are the commercial tools, and then of course there's Other. And I see already I've got some people voting for Confluence, which would definitely be an Other kind of category. Also, I'm seeing SDL and PTC Styler, which is part of the Arbortext suite. So I will give you just a few seconds to finish up with this. Okay, I'm up to looks like about 80% have voted. So I am going to go ahead and close the poll. Oops, 88%, still some people jumping in. All right, so let's close the poll and take a look here. 58% of you are going to be using the DITA Open Toolkit. That doesn't surprise me. 37% say you're going to use help authoring tools. That does actually surprise me a little bit. That's awfully high. And then 30% page layout, 37% some other commercial tools, and 18% other. Looks like I got at least one vote for Confluence, a mention of SDL, a mention of PTC, and let's see, CMS, DITA Open Toolkit, and Antenna House. So sort of a wide variety of things that are going on there. Okay, great. So in this presentation does come with a warning. I'm going to talk a little bit about some product work that we have done. I'm also going to give you an overview of what your options are from the DITA Open Toolkit. So I wanted to make sure that you know what you're in for here. I should probably give you a picture of the people, the brains that are actually behind this. I'm today just the person delivering the webcast. So Simon built the web help interface that we're going to be talking about, and David built the PDF version. So when you start looking at DITA and your DITA output options, I've sort of categorized them like this. These are basically your choices. And not all of these are mutually exclusive. You can, of course, do a combination of things. But perhaps the first thing that you might want to take a look at is this idea of maybe lowering your standards for what constitutes acceptable output, because otherwise getting to acceptable output may be significantly expensive and, you know, perhaps sort of impossible looking. When you get started with DITA, you are looking at just a plethora of technical challenges. Just getting the DITA Open Toolkit up and running can be significantly challenging. And then configuring the Open Toolkit, or for that matter anything else, to get output that makes you happy is, you know, really a tall mountain of some sort. The challenges that you're going to run into, for starters, are these. There is just the technology load and the learning curve that goes along with that technology. In the Open Toolkit, we are dealing with ANT, which is a build tool which allows you to do automated generation of your output. But to give you an idea, ANT is really intended for doing things like compiling Java. So this is a programmer tool. We have CSS, cascading style sheets. We have XSLT, the extensible style sheet language transformations. We have HTML, and we have XSLFO, which is an extension of XSL, extensible style sheet language, formatting objects. And that is for generating PDF. Now, if you've done some work with CSS, then CSS and HTML, then XSLT is perhaps doable, and then XSLFO is kind of another layer on top of that, and then you go up the curve to ANT. We're talking really about a programming kind of operation. So there's a real challenge here that you are going way beyond what you might have been doing in configuring a template in FrameMaker or setting up a Flare environment or anything like that. This is a much, much more challenging and sort of harder core sort of publishing operation. The second thing you're going to run into is that the default plugins that you have in the Open Toolkit are not suitable for production purposes. And what I mean by that is that you can't just take the Open Toolkit and generate HTML or generate Eclipse help or HTML help and run with it. What you're going to get out of the box is pretty unattractive. And there's some work that needs to be done there just to get to a point where it looks reasonable. There are then two significant other problems that many of you have probably run into. The first one is that the Open Toolkit out of the box does not provide support for web-based help. So if you want a tri-pane interface that is browser-based, similar to a web help or a WebWorks help or, you know, that type of thing, you do not have that out of the Open Toolkit out of the box. And the last and perhaps worst problem that you're going to run into is that the PDF is an order of magnitude more difficult to configure than the HTML-based or the markup-based stuff. So you just have this really long list of challenges that you face if you go into the Open Toolkit. Now, the Open Toolkit has some advantages. I'm not saying it's the wrong choice, but you look at this list and it's pretty daunting. So it's important as you embark on this to look at all your options and choose your tools wisely, because if you pick the incorrect foundational technology, the thing that's not right for you, you're going to have problems. Now, this can go a lot of different ways. If you're in a situation where you cannot get hardcore technical resources, either in-house or externally, then the DITA Open Toolkit may not be the way to go because you will not have the technical expertise to configure it. On the other hand, if you want your stuff to look a certain way and it has to be that way and no other way, then perhaps choosing something that's a little more canned and out of the box is not the right answer because you won't get exactly what you are looking for. So it's important to kind of look at what your options are and figure out where this is going to go. I wanted to ask you, before I take this too much further, what you think the biggest obstacle is. And again, you can give me multiple answers if you want. What are your, what do you see as the biggest problems here? What are the things that you're facing that you feel as though are just, I don't know about insurmountable, but what's the biggest obstacle that you're looking at, and what's the most problematic thing that you're facing when you start thinking about producing DITA output? And I'm getting lots and lots of votes for technology and learning curve, which is interesting. And again, if you have an other, do go ahead and specify that, and I'll be interested to see what people come up with. So we have one vote for lack of documentation, which is for the industry that we're in is sort of vaguely ironic, but I guess there we are. All right, we're already up to 84%. I'm going to give you another 5 seconds or so, and then I'm going to close this poll and put up the results. All right, so what do we have here? Too much technology, 68, 70%, not enough time, a third of you, web-based help, a third of you, PDF, 60%, and under other we have lack of documentation. We have a company set style guide and no option to not divert but diverge from that. We have biggest obstacle, getting a CMS up and running on my budget. Yes, indeed. Must control page counts in multiple languages. That's an interesting one. And no support for embedded fonts for PDF. That's interesting, and we should talk about that maybe offline, because I don't know exactly what technology, well actually I think you told me what technology you're using, but certainly it could be done. Okay, interesting. So moving right along here, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these options that we have come up with. So option 1 is lower your standards. And this is, of course, not exactly technology specific. I started my career in this industry as a production editor. I was the person who was responsible for managing page breaks and managing line breaks and making sure that things look nice on a page and copy fitting. So as a former production editor, this idea does not make me very happy, because this was my job, was caring about these little typographic things. But I think in reality we have to look at the question of whether our standards for what makes a reasonable PDF or what makes a reasonable output, whether those are perhaps higher than our customers or our end users, the people who are reading this stuff. As we go into some of these XML implementations, people are telling me things like, I have to be able to fix the line breaks. Bad line breaks are completely unacceptable. Or I have to be able to copy fit the pages. I don't want short pages, which would be a page that has less than, say, half a page of content on it. If that happens, I'm going to go back and copy fit the chapter to get around it. I want to balance my headings so that if I have a 2-line heading, that I don't have one really long heading and then one little word hanging out on the second line. So the question there with those types of requirements is, when you say this is unacceptable, is it unacceptable to your audience or is it unacceptable to you? And I think, unfortunately, the vast majority of the time, the answer is that it's me or us who are saying, we want these things, we want these typographic niceties, but I'm not so sure that our audience cares. Now, if you're delivering content to tech writers, they may care. And if you are working for the Journal of Fine Typography, then they certainly care. But if you're delivering, documentation for business software, if you are delivering documentation for, power plants, all sorts of other things, they may not care beyond a certain basic standard. So the less sophisticated your formatting is, the lower the implementation cost, the greater the automation, all of which reduces costs, of course. And I will emphasize that this is really, really useful when you're going into PDF from DITA, because PDF is really a significant technical obstacle, much more so than HTML and the other markup type languages. So with some trepidation, I tell you to consider lowering your standards. Doesn't make me very happy, but I think that's the reality of the direction we're going. So within that, our first option would be to take a look at the DITA Open Toolkit. The Open Toolkit is going to give you output to a variety of markups, including PDF, HTML, RTF, HTML Help, Eclipse Help, and some other stuff I've left out. The great and glorious advantage of the Open Toolkit is that it is open source, which means you can sort of take it and do whatever you need to do. You can extend it, you can add to it, you can modify it, you can take things out, you can put things in, you can do whatever you want. You can get some really, really interesting automation with the DITA Open Toolkit. You can do build automation, build integration. If you've got a requirement from somebody saying things like, we want to be able to update the documentation every night and post it on our internal web server, nightly builds, incremental updates, those kinds of things, the Open Toolkit is very, very appealing for that. The problem is, of course, with bullet number 3. And when I say challenging to configure, I think I'm understating the matter. It is extremely difficult to get it up and running, to configure it, to make changes. If you want to modify, for example, a CSS file within the HTML, that's not so bad. HTML help, provided that you're not doing multilingual HTML help, is not so bad. If you're doing multilingual HTML help, you're going to have some issues with the table of contents for some weird reasons. But if you're doing PDF, your life is going to be really, really unpleasant, at least initially. So that's kind of the nutshell version of the Open Toolkit. It's free, but it's not going to be cheap. Option B is custom development. Now, this could be customization of the Open Toolkit within the Open Toolkit. You could also do custom development outside of that. There's nothing to stop you from, for example, writing your own style sheets from scratch. And on some days when I'm having a particularly bad day with the Open Toolkit, starting over looks really, really appealing. However, you do have to balance that against a lot of the built-in stuff that you get, conditional processing, the map expansion and resolution, conrefs being expanded and resolved, cross-references, all that processing you would have to redo, so that would be no fun at all. But custom development, let's assume inside the Open Toolkit, is going to be pretty expensive and pretty time-consuming. If you have non-negotiable requirements, if you've been told it has to look exactly like this because either A, our company style guide says so, or B, our regulators say so, or perhaps C, both, then this is probably going to be the way to go, is to go ahead and bite the bullet and do the custom work. There are, of course, expert consultants available. I've got a few of them here, and there are a number of others, of course, also available. So this is going to be expensive, and it's going to take some time. But if you want it the way you want it, then that may be the correct approach. One place where you're going to see, I think, a lot of custom development, in addition to regulated industries, would be in cases where the content is the product. So I'm thinking here of publishers, book publishers, information, people who deliver information as their product, so something to consider there. Another option within this would be to take a look at these plugins that I'm going to show you in a minute. So we've built a couple of new plugins that run inside the Open Toolkit. They are standard Open Toolkit plugins. That means that they consist of things like XSLT, XSLFO, CSS, maybe some graphics, and possibly an ANT script. You can take those and customize them further, but they give you kind of a reasonable starting point. And the two that we've released are for web-based help and for sort of more reasonable PDF. And we'll take a look at those in a bit. I do have some examples of those available. Another thing you might want to take a look at, especially if you are doing book publishing, is the DITA for Publishers plugin. This was built by Elliot Kimber. It is open source, and I've given you the reference there. It will produce EPUB and Kindle output from DITA. It will also do Word to DITA and DITA into InDesign. So there's some really interesting foundational technologies there that you might want to take a look at. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about why it is that PDF publishing is hard. Basically, PDF or print formatting has a lot more stuff going on the page than HTML. You've got page margins, which you kind of don't have in HTML. You have potentially 2 columns, you've got tables, you've got all sorts of just interesting stuff going on, and just a lot more that you can do with a printed page than you can with HTML. As a corollary to that, the XSLFO has to support the page layout that you're looking for, so that's a problem, and it makes for a pretty obnoxiously complicated language. If you think about FO as being essentially your page design template in Word or FrameMaker or InDesign or Quark or whatever you might be using, only written out in text. Think of a reverse engineered page template with all the specs written out in text. That's basically what XFL FO is. Your other option would be to take your XML and push it into a page layout tool, like Quark, InDesign, FrameMaker. When you do that, you're going to have some very similar challenges, and getting that configured and getting all the templates working exactly right and getting everything formatted the way you want is pretty challenging and or unpleasant. If you go to an automated workflow, by which I mean one where you do not touch the end product once it's generated, then you're giving up the ability to do page-by-page formatting, to do copy fitting, line breaks, those kinds of things. So you can go to sort of a hybrid workflow where you take the XML, slurp it into, let's say, FrameMaker, fix some page breaks, do some stuff, and then generate your PDF. Or you can go to a completely automated workflow where you generate from XML to PDF, and that's it. That automation does not require going through the Open Toolkit, but if you go through the Open Toolkit, you do not have the option of tweaking, basically. So you then have to give up the page-by-page, line-by-line stuff, and that is harder for some of us than others. So in addition to, or aside from the Open Toolkit for PDF, you do have some other options here. Page-based layout tools, which I've mentioned, also help authoring and conversion tools, and then high-end processors. The high-end processors, what I'm talking about here are things like 3B2 or XPP. These are very, very expensive kinds of things, and if you need them, you probably know it. They will do things like loose-leaf publishing out of XML. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about that one, but I did want to address the other two. So in the page-based layout tools, what you're going to be dealing with is excellent PDF output. It will look very, very nice. InDesign, in particular, does a lovely job of kerning and hyphenation, justification, those kinds of things. I mean, those pages look beautiful. And setting up a formatting template in InDesign or FrameMaker is clearly easier than configuring the DITA Open Toolkit. However, you're going to run into some issues. There are white space issues, there are mapping issues, there are specialization issues, just issue after issue after issue. And if you need to round trip your content, so in other words, you want to take your XML, open it up in FrameMaker, render it to PDF, make some changes in the files, and then send it back to XML. That can be challenging in FrameMaker, and it's going to be impossible or close to it in the other page layout tools like InDesign and Quark. So round tripping can be done in FrameMaker, probably can't be done reasonably in your other options here. On the help authoring conversion side, what we're looking at here is Flare, RoboHelp, AuthorIt, and then the conversion tools, DITA2Go and ePublisher Pro. These are going to be easier to configure than the Open Toolkit, so that's a plus. They're going to provide web-based help solutions, browser-based help, so that's a plus. But the interface or the automation that you're going to get in bringing in your DITA content is probably not going to be 100%. You're probably going to end up doing some tweaking, and there may be some limitations there. So it looks a little easier, but you're going to have a trade-off, I think, with automation. And you know, I would also point out that most of these are not free, so there's that to consider, but they're not particularly expensive, so I don't think that should be a huge obstacle. It's worth noting that your cost here, by far, is going to be in configuration and not in licensing, unless you go to one of the really, really high-end tools. And if you're doing that, you're probably going to spend a fortune on configuration as well. All right, so having said all of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've done with these plugins. We built something called Scriptorium PDF. It's based on the Open Toolkit PDF 2 transform. It runs in the Open Toolkit 1.5. whatever, and it addresses the sort of the most common concerns that you have with the PDF out of the box. So a couple of the things we've done, this is not everything, but a couple of the things we've done is provided an easy way to do page size and margins, fonts, headers and footers, table of contents we fixed the indexing issue in FOP. For those of you who don't know, out of the box, the PDF2 transform will not produce an index in the open source Apache FOP processor. It does have indexing commands built in, and if you use a commercial rendering engine, RenderX or Antenna House, it will generate an index. So the commands are in there, but FOP doesn't support them because of the open source limitations, basically, of the tool. So we found a workaround to get it to generate in FOP, and then, of course, index formatting. So out of the box, this is sort of what the PDF looks like. We took here the intro to the DITA Open Toolkit in ANT and just ran it through the default PDF transform. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to give you an idea of what this looks like. Okay, so this is the, oh, look, I have a webcast. This is the out-of-the-box appearance of the PDF. This is what it looks like when you first generate the PDF. And we took this example here. This is the intro to the DITA Open Toolkit ANT Quick Start kind of thing. So this is not our content. This was written by somebody else. And what we have here then is sort of the basic look and feel out of the box from the OT. What we've done then is we've reconfigured this into something that's a little bit more, I don't know, less unattractive, let's say, and delivered it that way. The things that are sort of obviously controllable here are the sidebar. That sort of side column width is easy to manage. The fonts that are going to be used by the headings and the body text, and for that matter the footers, all those kinds of things, we've basically parameterized so that you can control them easily. And that's what we've done. So this is the sort of out-of-the-box from our initial PDF, and I have a link, or PDF transform. I have a link later on with some more details about exactly what it is that we did in here. But what we essentially tried to do is clean this up so that A, it looks better out of the box, and B, if you decide that this is something that you want, that you can make some changes to it more easily. So that is an option for you. It may or may not be right for you, but that's essentially what we've done there. Excuse me. The configuration that we've provided looks sort of like this. So instead of having to kind of dig around these XSL files, which many of you have probably done, you get these variables which are, reasonably well documented and then have information about what you need to do there. So if you change that date in footer to no and reran the transform, then the date would disappear. You can also, of course, control how it is formatted. And one of the things we're doing with these plugins is providing out-of-the-box formatting initially. We give you sort of a checklist of stuff, and you tell us what settings you want, and we'll go ahead and make those settings for you and ship you the plugin pre-configured so that you have less work to do. Oh, and I should mention that there is documentation. For web-based help, we built a web-based help interface. You can, of course, do this through the help authoring tools, or both XMetal and TriSoft have web-based help output. So if you have a license for XMetal or a license for TriSoft, you can get web-based help. And I believe there are a couple of other tools that also do this. But the Open Toolkit itself does not have web-based help. So what we did was we made web-based help. All right. This is information that is coming directly from the plugin. I haven't done anything to it. I haven't configured it. I haven't, built anything in particular. And so we did the little tri-pane thing and just set up some very basic formatting, which of course again is customizable. Little next and previous buttons. There is, I don't think there's an index in this one. And then we have a search. So if you went and said, let's say output class, then it will return the results. We'll click on that one, and it does, I don't know if you can quite see this in your version, but it does in fact highlight the output term that we're looking for, which I think we can actually turn off. Where is it? There it is. Okay, so there's output class, and you can turn this off, in which case the highlighting will disappear. One thing I was particularly impressed with, this is Simon's work. He did, in fact, also build Japanese output. So we have Asian language support in here. This is a different text. It's not the same information that's in the English version. Cute little breadcrumbs. I have very little actual Japanese, but you'll notice I highlight, for example, this term and put it in here, and I'm going to assume this is search. Wish me luck. If we search on that and click, then you will see that come up right there. See it in there? So it does highlight the search term, and we do have Asian search working, which is, for those of you who don't know, is actually really, really hard to do. So that's what we've done in the Web Help plugin. Okay? And like the PDF, that one's going to be configurable, and you can do what you need to do there. All right, so this one gives you tri-pane browser-based help. There's a picture, and there's the highlighting. Oh, I actually did the same highlighting. Interesting. All right, I hate presentations where people don't tell you what things cost, so I went ahead and put that in. $10,000 for the Scriptorium PDF plugin, including some initial customization, $4,000 for the help. I think, from my point of view, I think this is, perhaps a good idea because we're solving a lot of these sort of common PDF problems, and for that matter, the common web help problem. I'm hoping that this will help people rather than having to go in and do, all this custom work over and over and over again, which is kind of what we've run into. I wanted to talk a little bit about how you might go about making your decision. What are you going to pick? What option are you going to use to figure out what output you choose or what output option you choose? And the list that I've come up with is this one. You might want to start with platform requirements because, for example, if you are not a Windows-only shop, that is going to limit your choices right away. A lot of the help authoring tools are Windows-only. Something like XMetal is Windows-only. DITA to Go is Windows-only. AuthorIt, Flare, RoboHelp, they're all Windows only. So if you need something that's going to run on a Unix system or that's going to run on a Mac, you may have some issues there right off the bat. Technical resources is one that I think is important to look at. What's available to you? What kind of expertise do you have in-house? What kind of expertise can you hire as consultants? Do you have budget for that? Because if the answer is we don't have anything, we can't get technical resources, then clearly you're going to need to find a way to do this without this enormous upfront technical investment. We've talked about typography, and I think there's some issues around that. And then these last three, to me, kind of go in a group: velocity, volume, and versioning. The more of these you have, the more of the 3 V's you have, the more need you have for automation. Okay? Velocity is how often do you update your content? How often are you publishing? How many releases do you have a year? And, of course, I'm assuming you have a release as opposed to just sort of publishing incremental stuff every day. But what's your velocity? Do you release an update once every 3 years or once every 3 months? It makes a big difference. The volume that you have, how many pages, how many topics, how much content are you dealing with? Again, the higher the volume, the more likely that you need automation and the more likely that, that automation will pay off. Versioning is the conditional stuff. So how many different kinds of conditions are you dealing with? How many versions are you shipping? Do you have an unlimited number of versions? Lots and lots of different roles and lots of different things going on there. More likely then that automation will pay off. So basically, the higher the 3 V's are, the more likely that you probably want to do something pretty technical and pretty automated to get the payoff from that. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that, even if you don't feel like you're really well suited to climb high things, you can probably get there. This stuff is not impossible. It's hard, but it's not impossible. Now, I have a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about, and then I will take some questions. We are currently doing a structured authoring survey. We're looking at adoption rates, issues, tools. It'll be open until March 1st, and the link is there. So I would encourage you to participate in this if you haven't already. We're hoping to get a good number of people and to be able to draw some conclusions about what people are doing and where and when and how. And, of course, we will send you the results if you participate and give us a way to contact you. So we've had at least a few people participate that did not want the results and did not want to cough up their email address, which is fine with me. But we will, if you participate and give us your email address, we will send you the report when it is done, which will be sometime in April, I think. Other things I wanted to mention, we have just scheduled a webcast with Tony Self. We are about to publish a book of his called the DITA Style Guide, and he will be doing a webcast on DITA style issues, something around what's in that book. So that webcast will be March 9th. We also hope to have the book available by then. We are going to be doing a Trends in TechCom again. We did one last year that was real popular. We have not scheduled that yet precisely, but it'll be sometime in March, and I expect to do a webcast in April with the survey results. There's a blog post about the PDF plugin that David wrote, which you can find at that email address, or sorry, at that web address. And I also gave you our email address if you want to contact us about that.